All right, so I'd just like to thank you all for coming in and joining me on the meeting, because I'm pretty excited. It's the first one I've ever done. It's the first Zoom meeting I've ever hosted, and it's on a subject that I have been very closely looking at for the last few years, and been reasonably quiet about, except in my own social media pages, which are pretty limited to Facebook, if I'm honest. So my history is 37 years in radio broadcasting. I started in Western Victoria. I've worked in a lot of regional markets. I've worked in Adelaide, Canberra, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Gold Coast, and now I live on the Sunshine Coast. On this occasion, I'm really keen to talk about both the perspective of privacy and, of course, Graham, with what you're putting forward with the airline industry. I have friends who are pilots, not with Qantas, but I also have friends in the military who are pilots and are being coerced into getting the jab as well. So all of this interplays, and I think Sally, we were talking the other night about privacy, and you brought up so many brilliant points about privacy that people today have forgotten, and unfortunately don't like to be reminded of. Are you finding that?
Yeah, I think that I'm not always sure for the reasons, but I think as soon as we start to converse with people on these things, they get defensive because they're worried something's going to be, they've taken a position on something and they're worried something's going to be taken away from them. And I think mostly what I hear are people coming from fear. And there's a lot of media pushing ideas onto people that, you know, that for the benefit of the greater good, that you've got to do this, or the benefit of the greater good, you've got to do that. And what I really feel, and I certainly feel for Graham, is that one of the big things that's happening right now is we're having our privacy stripped away from us. And when we try and explain it, people reason, well, it's for the best because of, you know, it's for the best of everybody, but they haven't stopped and looked at all the different aspects and all the different potential outcomes. They're looking at
the consequences
correct.
of their decision.
They're looking at a small thing and saying, because I'm worried about a virus, I should know whether you've been vaccinated. The fact that it doesn't stop someone vaccinated catching it, it doesn't stop them passing it on, and that they might also have had protection. They suddenly feel that they have the entitlement to know your sensitive personal information. And there seems to be a lack of understanding, not just from your neighbor the person at the supermarket. I've been approached in the supermarket and asked, wow, in the supermarket, which just astounds me, like they're a complete stranger, to your employer who's trying to justify why they've got the entitlement. And I'm trying to explain to people that, you know, this has taken several faces. So some organizations have by default, and it's actually really sly the way they've done it. They've offered a vaccination, but rather than offer you, go to your local hospital, and if they want to pay for it or if they want to make a donation, however they want to do it, it's free for anybody. So there's no reason for an employer to be organizing a medical procedure for its employees. Okay.
Yeah.
What the employer does by organizing a medical procedure, the employer by default gains data that they might not have necessarily gained. And so that actually impacts on the privacy principles. And there is actually, it is actually addressed in the OAIC, which is the Office of the Australian Information Commission. And they actually talk about key principles about if you get information by way of a third party or by way of a process that you might not, and it is sensitive, they have to actually ask themselves, would I have been able to get this information if I'd asked directly? Would I have? And if I wouldn't have, they should disregard that information, but that's not what's happening. So by default, they've actually violated my privacy straight away, not just mine.
Can you put that into a practical example? I heard you use one the other night in a chat that we were in, and it involved asking about people's sexuality.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about sexuality. And so when we talk about sexuality, the reason we raise that is your sexuality, so including your sexual orientation, your religion, your politics, and your medical information, including your COVID-19 status, vaccination status, are sensitive information. And because they're sensitive, they're afforded a higher protection than normal information. So when you look at me, you might assume I'm a female. Someone might want to, assume how tall I am, how many kilos I weigh. There's so many things you can assume about me by talking to me or looking at me. And that information is not private. It's readily available. Private information might be personal, might be my name, my phone number, my address, my credit card details, things that I might give out when I go into a shop, or perhaps I book an airline ticket and I give that information out. And we know that we have to safeguard that information if I'm giving it to a certain extent. That we have to be careful what we give out, but I won't be discriminated against for my name. I mean, I might have. I've been called all sorts of things when I was growing up and made fun of, but I'm not going to be discriminated against in the terms of our discrimination laws. But we get sensitive information, and that information is something that you can't readily get from me unless I choose to share it with you.
Yeah, you have to volunteer that.
Correct. I either have to volunteer, and if I do, there's a risk I might be discriminated against. And, we can all think of situations when that might happen. And so for that reason, it's got a higher protection. So if we take, I think what I like to say to people is take your COVID-19 vaccination status out of this. Forget about that. In the Privacy Act, they don't separate that like 4 lollipops and say, here's 4 lollipops, choose which one's more important. They say this whole lot of information is important, including biometric data and genetic data now is actually in that. So when we do that, we say, all right, if we take that aside and I say, now my workplace wants to ask me about my sexuality, I'm thinking that's inappropriate. Why do you need to know that?
Yeah.
And this is something I like to use the sexuality one because schools are starting to ask the vaccination status of students. Okay.
Yeah.
And everyone feels that they should say it because don't we need to keep the greater community safe? Okay.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, there's a health issue, but in law, there are remedies that there are certain things that deal with that. And they talk about if the health issue is a real issue, then there are remedies in law to make sure that that information can be handed over willingly or without your consent. But that doesn't say, so if we look at that, if the school asks me information about my child and they want to know their sexual orientation, that would be an uncomfortable thing. I'd want to know why. Now, in a private school, they're not allowed to ask that. But in a government organisation, they can ask because sometimes they might say that they use it for data collection or to build statistics and things like that, like a census. But it's really important for people to know that they can only collect it with your consent, and it must be willing. You can't be intimidated and threatened and coerced into it. So that's what we're seeing happening. So if you look at the case of healthcare workers, this is a really critical one because those people are a really interesting subsect where they work in a healthcare environment. They work for healthcare providers. Now, the word provider is really important to understand because they provide healthcare, but the worker is not there to be provided care. They are giving care. Yes. So they are under their own set of agreement. An airline provides travel, a school provides education, not to the teachers though, they provide it. So there's a part of the Act where healthcare providers can request certain information, but it's not meant it's been twisted to imply that the people who give that should also be providing their personal sensitive information.
Yes.
When in fact, if you're a patient, that information has to be relative to the treatment. So you can't, if I go to the doctor to see an ingrown toenail, it wouldn't be appropriate to ask me if I've ever had an STD. That
Yeah,
would be in, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. So this is probably the concern, that because of this big fear campaign over COVID-19, and I'm not dismissing anybody who's died or anyone who's lost someone. I don't mean to dismiss that or their heartache or anything like that.
No.
But what we need to be careful of is we are heading ourselves down a track where we are willingly giving up our privacy.
Yeah.
And we're not even thinking about what we're doing.
And we won't recognize it until it's too late, until there's that knock on the door and come with us because you've thought something you shouldn't have and you said it out loud, or you printed it somewhere online in a web page that you wrote on, or whatever. And I fear that that's coming sooner rather than later, particularly in the case of Victoria, which is worrying. So these privacy protections, shall we call them, are available to every person who is asked the question of providing their vaccine status. How would you advise people to present that argument, to say, well, you really, is it as simple as just saying, look, I'm sorry, I don't think you've got the right to ask me that question under the Privacy Act?
Yes, I think there's a few ways that you can think of going about it. And I guess the person, your neighbor, the person in the supermarket who comes up and asks you this information, what we have to remember is that they don't have any ability to compel you. They have no contract with you anyway, so they can't withhold something from you, and you're quite within your rights to say, that's really private, or that's a really hot topic. I mean, I think it's such a hot topic because it's dividing so many friends and family.
Exactly.
And I would just say that's a really hot topic. I'm not sure why you're asking me, but I prefer to keep my medical information private. And can we change the subject? If it's your employer, though, we take Graham for an example. Graham has been backed into a corner where he's been told you have to have a medical procedure by a certain date, or I guess you just don't want to work in the airline business anymore. Now, not only is that a threat, it's threatening, it's coercive, it's intimidating, but Graham's had his privacy stripped from him already because they know by default they've offered payments. The companies have been offered payments for everybody who's gone and had a vaccination.
Wow.
So by way of giving you your 4 hours or your day of pay or whatever, they've also, by reverse engineering, obtained medical, private, sensitive information that they would not have ordinarily gotten, and they're using that as well.
Sure.
And this is, to me, Graham has had his privacy violated.
Yes.
He's been forced in this position.
Graham, how do you feel about the violation?
Well, it's part of a bigger picture, Carl, because by making the video I made, I virtually came out anyway. Sure. If you know what I mean. So, and what I've realised in the few days since I made that video, that my privacy has virtually gone, and in a lovely way, because I'm getting so much support, so much love and support.
Great.
Not only from around the world, but from within the airline. There are many, many people in our airline who feel like I do, but they felt too frightened to say it.
Yep.
So, my privacy is. Look, Carl, I've said a lot about my private life in the media. I've been running a ministry with my wife for 15 years where we deal with victims of childhood sexual abuse. We help them recover. I deal with a lot of men who are addicted to pornography, which was my big addiction. I made a TV program in a Qantas uniform called The Jet Pilot's Journey, I'm interviewed in the cockpit, and then we move to a studio where I take my uniform off and I talk about the degradation of my porn addiction and how it drove me to the point of suicide and what it did to my family. I wear my heart on my sleeve. And my saying is, it's okay to wear your heart on your sleeve so long as you don't stick your arm in the toilet. I have stuck my arm in the toilet on occasion. Yeah. There are some people who are now thinking that I've really stuck my arm in the toilet. I've got lifelong friends in the aviation industry who are starting to think I've lost the plot, and they're treating me with a kindness that you would relate to somebody who's mentally ill. Yep. It's a condescending kindness, yep, but it's a kindness. It's a love of sorts, and they're happy to say to me, you know, why don't you just get the jab? And I say, I may get a jab one day, but I'm not ready to yet, because I cannot give informed consent to something that I have no proper trusting information in. And I had a friend ring me yesterday, a dear friend, who said to me that, you know, I'm against everything you said in your video, and I couldn't look you in the eye unless I told you how I felt, but I still love you. And right. I said, I really appreciate that. And anyway, he called me yesterday, and it got to the conversation of why am I doing what I'm doing? And I indicated to him that, and this is a long-winded answer to your question about privacy. Sure. I indicated to him that it's basically, why don't you get the jab? And I said, well, I can't be properly informed. I said, I'm doing some research that shows me there's a lot of other treatments available for people who get it. And also there's a lot of negative data about the ramifications of being vaccinated that is not being disseminated through mainstream media. And that causes me concern. And he said, well, I just trust the government to tell me what it is I need to know. And so many people do that.
I don't know how many times I hear that. Oh.
And I said to him, all right, let me ask you a question. I said, imagine if somebody told you that we're going to create a society where the government and big corporations, big tech, big pharma, all join together for the common good. What did you think about that? And he said, that would be awesome. And I said, well, what I've just described to you is fascism. The definition of fascism is bringing big corporations and the government together for the common good. Yep. Now, I said to him, how do you feel about that? And he said, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. I said, well, when I say the word fascism to you, what comes to your mind? He says, Hitler and Germany. And I said, okay, Hitler and Germany. All right, so what happened there? A whole bunch of people were starving because of what happened after the end of World War I. Germany was isolated. They were starved. The propaganda machine stepped up to fill them with hope for their future that would relieve them from their starving. It then got enough of them on board to actually get to a stage where they were so propagandized, if that's a word, so converted to the message that they were then turned on the rest of the community who weren't yet convinced.
Yep.
And so neighbour turned against neighbour. And we are facing a society now where Australia is, if it isn't already, it is right on the brink of fascism. In fact, there are states in Australia, and Victoria is one, where fascism is now alive and well. Yeah. And the people down in Victoria who know this for a fact are struggling to get their friends to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Now, we're in a situation where if the Constitution is not honoured, and if the Constitution is not defended, and that can only happen when challenges are made in the High Court of Australia, then these despots that are running the states at the moment under emergency power legislation can do whatever they want. If you get to a point where corporations and governments, officials, do not abide by the Constitution, then you have corruption. And when you have corruption, you have the Constitution being trashed, and then you have a dictatorship, Carl. It's just history is there, and people who don't remember history are set to repeat it. So my big push about all of this current issue, if the COVID pandemic had been allowed to run its course without any kind of vaccination, like many of the epidemics of past history, the plague and so on, there are deaths, there are spikes in the death rate in history, and they seem to last 12 or 18 months and they eventually burn themselves out.
Yes.
If nothing had been done, we would probably have already been through this. We'd have all developed some kind of herd immunity, and it probably would have gone. I'm not saying that. I don't want fact checkers saying, "Oh, you know, independent fact checking." Isn't that a joke these days?
Yeah.
I don't fact checkers, you know, having a go at me about that. You do your own thinking. But historically, the Black Plague, it died out. The Spanish flu, it died out.
Yeah.
But what you're left with in this situation is you're left with a pandemic that will not go away unless the people stand up, and that pandemic is fear.
Exactly.
So I said to my friend, who told me that, oh, you've always dug deeper than I do. I just don't dig very deep. I said to my friend, I want you to think that COVID is gone and that in 12 or 18 months, the big thing that we're all fearful of is climate change. And we've got a lovely little girl in Scandinavia who's running around telling us that we should be afraid, be very afraid. And I can't believe the world is listening to that extent that they are. But anyhow, we're going to be in a situation where you could be sitting at home and there's a knock on your door. And when you answer the door, the police are there asking for your car keys because your car is about to be impounded because it's no longer, it's a fossil burning fuel car, and you no longer have the right to own it.
Yep.
And they'll say, and when I said this to my friend, he said, they can't do that. They can't do that. Well, I've got to tell you that the mechanisms that have been put in place already allow them to do that if we don't stand and say no.
Yeah.
And they're the things that we have to fight for. I think mandating something that's meant to be good for you is ridiculous, because if it's proven to be good for you, then you will take it.
Yeah.
I think mandate, and they have overcooked the goose, Carl. The media have been pushing this, the governments and the health bureaucracies have been pushing this so much. It's like when you ring up, when a guy rings you in the middle of the night to want to sell you some carpet cleaning or roof tiles. They push it so hard.
It's got to a point now, I find it so difficult to understand how people aren't grasping at least some of the facts, or at least seeing some of the contradictions that are being placed in right in front of their faces every day of the week, with everything from masks, for instance. If masks were so important to us from spreading disease, where are the biosecurity containment bags or things that we've got to put them in and so they can be gone and burnt? No, we can just take them off, drop them wherever we like. I saw a news article the other day with the one floating around a sea turtle's neck. That was really pleasant. So you know, people aren't realizing, those little blue and white rags that they're wearing aren't stopping any virus being transmitted through the air into their, you know, from stopping them from inhaling it. The gaps in the paper is too big, and yet people blindly go forth. I've got a lot of friends who don't believe that this whole thing is actually part of a clinical trial. And clinical trial is, you know, two other words for medical experiment. But people do not discern the difference. I've tried to explain it in a way by saying, well, Dr. Jekyll did a medical experiment on himself that gave us Mr. Hyde.
Really good.
Dr. Frankenstein did a medical experiment that created one body out of many human bodies.
He created a monster.
Yeah, an absolute monster. But pharmaceutical companies create clinical trials on thousands of people, not individuals or small groups. They call it clinical trial, not medical experiment. Because if you went to any university and said, hands up who wants to be part of a medical experiment for $50 or $300 or whatever they pay this week, you're not going to get too many volunteers. A clinical trial sounds much more appealing and much more, I don't know, less threatening. Is that the right way of describing it? So even when I've gone to the TGA website and said, look, it's in the TGA's own word, they don't put it up there in a headline, in a banner that says this is a clinical trial. But
I think it's on page 33, isn't it? all the way back in the book in page 33 or 34. You have to actually read that far to get that far. And
at the Therapeutic Goods Administration website on the safety information page, it comes up and says, before any COVID-19 vaccine approved for Australia, it'll be subject to well-established and rigorous assessment and approval processes of the TGA and the Department of Health. They've received applications in assessing preliminary data following the COVID-19 vaccines, and they are using the provisional pathway and rolling review process. So I thought, provisional pathway, and there was a link to that. So I clicked on that. And in the first paragraph, as part of the government's response to the review of medicines and medical device regulation, we are implementing a pathway for provisional registration for prescription medicines. Approval through provisional pathway will be on the basis of preliminary clinical data where there is potential for a substantial benefit to Australian patients. But if you go back to the other main page where we started at safety information, but in the paragraph and two underneath it, it says, all COVID-19 vaccine applications are being treated with the greatest priority as part of the Department of Health's response to the pandemic. Under normal circumstances, TGA's assessment for both provisional and general registration begins once all information to support registration is available. For COVID-19 vaccines, the TGA has agreed to accept rolling data to enable early evaluation of the data that comes to hand. Many of the large-scale clinical trials that will provide the evidence of safety and effectiveness are still progressing, and these results will be provided to the TGA as they become available. Can I ask, could they say it any clearer?
You know, Carl, I'm glad you raised that, because if I had $1 for every time I've tried to explain to people that particular document, I've highlighted it till I'm blue in the face. I've highlighted the word provisional. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
On the proviso of, that means they don't have it. I've highlighted to them that in one of the paragraphs up on the first or second page, it says, we will be basically taking the data from Australia. So all of these people who said, well, it'll be safe because they've already trialed it overseas. No. You are the trial.
Yep,
rolling data.
Particularly for 6 months to 12-year-olds.
It actually even says that, I think it even says about how frequently the reports go back. And I think it's monthly for the first 6 months. And then after that, there's a different change. So in 1 month, how many potential adverse events could happen in 1 month that are just getting collected? Additionally, I saw no less than, I went through the documentation with a medical friend and saw no less than 5 or 6 different acronyms for reporting bodies.
Yeah, wow.
That she hadn't heard of. So then we say, well, why so many? Is that not possible that things might slip through the cracks? And again, I sort of get to this whole thing and I say, surely at some point here, there should be the decision for each person to have fully informed consent and privacy around that decision.
Absolutely.
It always loops back. For you, for us, we're baffled.
We have sorry.
No, go Graham, go ahead.
We have to go back to how society has been morphed to accept these false realities, if you like. We live in a world where television programs, the most popular television programs are reality television programs, which have nothing to do with reality. Now, when the block first started, it was people renovating derelict buildings to make money out of them. It soon degenerated into 6 or 8 couples warring with each other, living out of scenarios that were created to bring them out, to bring the positive evil out of them. If that's a play on words I shouldn't have used. To bring the evil out of them.
The contestants are put through a psychological profiling test, and what's the point of putting a whole bunch of people in a confined space for 3 or 4 months and having them all get along? That's boring television.
So you get that, and people are tuned to that. They're not tuned to see what the bedroom looks like. They're tuned to see how one couple is pitched against another.
Yeah.
Then you have things like Married at First Sight, My Kitchen Rules. My Kitchen Rules, I call it My Kitchen Stinks. I've only ever watched one or two, and it's just come about because My Kitchen Rules is not about food.
No.
It's about people under pressure.
Yeah.
So we could go on. Big Brother, all these programs. Now, there's even a program, Carl, called Gogglebox, which apparently is about reality TV of people watching other reality TV programs. And we are sucked into it. Now, when you look at things like The Bachelor or Married at First Sight, I've had about 10 collective minutes watching all of those together. When you look at those programs, you're seeing a lot of ritzy ladies, young ladies with big puffy lips and all of that sort of stuff. And they got those puffy lips by injecting poison into their bodies. It's called Botox. And Botox is botulism.
Yeah.
Botulism. So as a society, we've been conditioned. Yeah, it's been tested. It's okay. You're actually sticking something akin to the plague into your lips or your buttocks or whatever you're doing. This is where society has gone. It is completely self-driven and not community-driven.
But the technician in the white coat said it was all right.
That's right. The thing that concerns me most is we get tunnel vision into this vax, pro-vax, anti-vax. It's destructive and it doesn't serve any purpose. We should be focusing on treatments. With this pandemic, I was contacted yesterday by a guy, Dr. Richard Lai. He's one of the directors of a company which is expanding its research into curing COVID. They have, in Australia, come up with something that's like a Ventolin puffer, which goes straight to the lung, not through the bloodstream.
Yep.
And you spray it in. If you were getting on a long-haul flight, if you breathe that in before you got on the aeroplane, you would starve any virus, any coronavirus that entered into your system. It would be starved because it would deny it of the proteins that it needs to survive. I had a chat to him yesterday. But what really irks me, Carl, is that this man and his company have been bending over backwards to get a hearing in government, to get a hearing by public health officials, to get it aired in some format in the mainstream media. And they've got to a stage now where they've actually been given approval in India to go to India and Nepal, where there are active cases, many active cases.
Yep.
Which I really don't think anyone can justify we have here in Australia. But anyway.
No, I agree.
They can go over there and trial this cure, not a vaccine, a cure. And it's simple. We look at when people like Dr. Peter McCullough put up really good, healthy regimes about actually curing this thing. If we treat it straight away, we can knock it on the head without anyone being hospitalised. And none of that gets a mention. So what is the health department telling us? If you feel symptoms, stay at home.
Yeah.
Don't go to a hospital until you have to. By the time you've arrived at the hospital, in many cases, the virus has got a hold on you. You've gone from the infectious stage to the inflammation stage. Why are we stifling the conversation in our community about curing this thing if you get it? How much cheaper would it be if every passenger on an airplane just squirted a Ventolin puffer into their lungs that would protect them from this virus?
Couldn't agree more.
We can't get a hearing.
And why do you think that is? Because everything you've just described is exactly how the cold and flu presented prior to end of 2018, 2019. And miraculously, COVID seems to have cured the deaths related to cold and flu prior to or post that time, because the levels have dropped significantly. So why then, using just exactly the logic you've applied, can't people see it? Why? And I have a theory. I believe it is because...
I've got one I'd love to float. I've got one I'd love to float too.
Yeah, sure.
I think this is really interesting we're talking about this, because what I see, I love to ask people about these and see their reactions. And what I find is they don't know about it. They've never heard about it.
Yeah.
I'll say, surely you've heard about that. No. all the things I hear, because I'm searching stuff, I think these algorithms send things my way. They allow me to see some things, and other people who know I'm open to the suggestion that there might be more out there send me things. Yet, even recently I went to Facebook jail for sharing a video of a professor in America talking about 11,000 deaths before the first autopsy. 11,000. That was, it was an incredible thing. Dr. Ryan, I think his name was, and he's part of a big consortium of medical professionals. And it astonished me that I was actually suspended for 3 days. Oh. And I couldn't understand. I thought, what on earth did I do? And it turned out it was that. And they said fake news. And I thought, what could be fake? He's a verified doctor. The video is him talking. He's explaining the data. So I think that for me, I found that interesting to share. So if I can't share that, then what else aren't they getting? So is it that people are naive? Is it that they don't want to know? Or is it that their information is being withheld and suppressed so they can't get access to it?
Well, that same video, I got 30 days for. I'm a bit further up the insulting Facebook track. But I got 30 days for it.
You must have had priors, because I think it was my first.
I've had a couple of 3 days. I've had a couple of 3 days, a couple of 7 days.
But even talking to people, what I notice is we often talk about the herd mentality.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were talking before about Botox, things like that. I not to disclose my sensitive medical information, and you can probably gauge, I've got probably more wrinkles than some others, but I've always felt a bit uncomfortable about what that might do to me and the possible concerns. And I noticed it's almost like a group. It's almost like fitting in with the crowd. We have to, it's like fitting, are we fitting in with the crowd, or are we fitting in with the herd?
Yeah.
I feel like more than ever, the people, a lot of people are telling me that they're having a vaccine. I don't ask, because I'm very mindful of their privacy. They tell me a lot of oversharing going on. They're telling me they're having it because, well, everybody else is. And, you're not going to be able to, like the whole family are, and they've got to just fit in. It's like all the girls at school have got Botox. Well, that does not mean, in my day, they'd say, well, that doesn't mean if you jump off a cliff, if they jump off a cliff, you don't have to jump too. So we've got this kind of fitting in. Everybody wants to belong to the uniform, to the organization, to the thought, to the movement.
Is it an embarrassment factor that we face when we confront people with facts like, that from the TGA, it is a clinical trial, medical experiment. Go and see if your life insurer is still going to pay out if you happen to keel over a stroke or a heart attack or whatever. And I think from what I've learned, they're not going to. Is it an embarrassing thing to discover that those strong-held beliefs that go against the things we're saying inhibits people once you confront them with the facts and enough of them? They get angry, and the only people they can get angry at are us, because they feel for whatever reason that they weren't smart enough to get it, they weren't smart enough to see it or whatever, and that's not what it is. It's not about how smart you are or how not smart you are. It's a whole heap of different things. So is it an embarrassment factor that we're fighting, trying to convince people of the truth of our arguments?
It's an interesting question, because we've been spending some time talking to neurolinguists, and we've been having them come, and we of course have had letters from our employers, and we want to read those letters and take the emotion out of it, and also there's a lot of words get used to phrase things a certain way, and the neurolinguists have been incredible helping us see how the wordplay happens. So one thing, like 2 words, okay, the word anti-vax is a word, it's a derogatory label coined to try and suppress, to intimidate anyone. You don't want to be called anti-vax, so just don't ask any questions. It sort of puts you in a category, and it puts people in the position of saying, oh, I'm not anti-vax, I'm not anti-vax. Why is anybody actually trying to justify, I'm anti-smoking? I don't smoke. I don't now. And none of us question the science about what smoking does after all these years, but to question something that everyone, I don't know, I think it's because of the money going around, I'm not really sure. But at the end of the day, I think any of that sort of thing where you want to apply a label to people is to intimidate them, to disempower them. And what the neurolinguists told us, which we were blown away by, the word vaccine hesitancy.
Yes.
Okay. Vaccine hesitancy is actually a phrase they've designed to imply and to help us understand that we're not going to have it. We're just hesitant. We're going to come around. So she was explaining that, saying, well, look, hesitancy doesn't mean you're not going to have it. It's just saying that you're just hesitating. It's implying that you have a phase you're moving through. And recently listening to one of the union discussions on it, people are referred, these are people who have the right to think for themselves, are referred to as low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Low-hanging fruit. I've got the impression of these pods of trees that they can just grab and they're the ones they can get to. I mean, I don't even understand, where do these phrases, that was Katie Atwell, who was trying to guide the unions as to how to overcome vaccine hesitancy. So for those people who are going to move along, the low-hanging fruit, this is where we understand that these decisions and the rhetoric that's coming out of the companies and also the government is not necessarily coming from the doctors. It's coming from psychologists and neurolinguists who are writing these letters and these dictates to get in our heads before we've even read the information. So when they're getting in our heads, these are the people who watch Channel 9, Channel 10, Channel 7, the newsreaders who are saturated with it day after day. They are being indoctrinated without even realizing they're being indoctrinated.
Right. I'm coining a new phrase. Words mean things and they have power. We have forgotten this. We have forgotten, and because we have forgotten that the actual meaning of a word, and we believe it means something when in fact it means something completely different. So we have to re-educate people to at least be aware that words mean things. Learn what those things are, because they are really important. It's called grammar fraud. And once you learn about grammar fraud, anything you read, particularly that comes from the government, you will read in a completely new light. Graham, look, we're all busy people and we've been talking for a long time. I can't let you go without saying your comments about Alan Joyce, who's been leading the pack when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the workplace, seems to have managed to implement a very unfair edict on his workers. And you talked about it in your video at length. I'm wondering whether or not there has been any corporate response, or have you seen your next roster?
I got paid last night, but pay came through. Look, there will be a corporate response. I don't know, that has to be allowed to play out without too much discussion from me at this stage, I think. But what I want to say, and it's important that we understand where we're at. I have read, and my wife reading with me, and another friend who's here, we're going through all the messages of support. People are in tears.
Yeah.
People who have had the vaccination are in tears. They feel like they've been coerced and they've lost their spirit. and they're downtrodden, and they can't even, apart from, I've had friends of mine who have had it, and friends of friends who've had strokes, and the doctors are saying, oh, we don't know what the cause is, but it's probably genetic.
Yeah.
So, but I'm getting thousands of doctors and nurses, paramedics, police officers, soldiers, all responding in absolute harmony with what I said.
Yep.
And they're fed up. I believe the stress leave in the Victoria Police at the moment is going through the roof. They're going to have real manning problems.
Yep.
And these are good people who signed up with a spirit to serve their community. When you join the police force, there are bad apples in every group, but most of them are there. They're really rock solid citizens, Yep. And they go out there. They want to serve their community. The military are the same. They want to serve and protect. That's what they're put out there for, not to protect Australians from Australians.
Unfortunately, in the police's case, in Victoria especially, they have forgotten the words that they spoke in their oath to protect and serve the people. Unfortunately, they've got that confused with protecting and serving the politics, not necessarily the politicians, but the politics, and it's tragic.
So those people in the services have had their spirits zapped. Qantas's motto, logo, whatever it is Qantas, the spirit of Australia. It's not Alan Joyce who's Qantas. It's not me. It's the people. Yep. They're Qantas.
Yeah.
I remember once I flew an aeroplane out of Bali, and there was a whole lot of people who got on board after the bombing, and you could just see the gaunt faces. And I took the time to get out of my seat when the door shut at the Bali terminal. I picked up the handset at the flight attendant station at the front of the aisle, and I asked them all to look up the aisle. And I said to them, I want you to hear my accent. The door is closed. You are now in Australia, even though we haven't left Bali yet. You're home. Now, you don't say stuff like this unless you have a spirit of what you believe in.
Yeah.
Now, Alan Joyce, and I hate referring to the person because it's the system. Alan Joyce is a tenacious fighter. He fights for the causes that he believes in. He has positioned Qantas, and I'm not saying this to keep my job.
No.
He has positioned Qantas to weather this storm as best as it can.
Agreed.
He's in that mindset. That's his job. That's what he's been paid to do. But the only other major altercation I've had with Alan Joyce that I was taken off flying duties for was a couple of years ago when he was using staff bonuses to coerce people to sign industrial agreements, and I thought that was wrong. And we had a fight over it. It became public, and I was told never to go to social media again. And anyhow, Alan Joyce is a man I actually admire. And when that argument was on, I put those posts up on Facebook. People started attacking his stature as a human being. People started attacking his sexual orientation. Yeah. And that really hurt me because Alan Joyce, like any other individual, deserves love and respect. And he deserves to be loved for the position that he's in, but not necessarily followed completely.
Yeah.
But his edicts in his life are his edicts for his life. And I said to people who were posting derogatory comments on Facebook, if this keeps up, I'll be taking down the post.
Yeah.
Do not attack the man. I don't want to be responsible for any pain that Alan Joyce might feel, nor anybody else. Alan Joyce will leave the airline industry one day eventually. He'll probably hang around. I don't know what his plans are. He'll probably hang around to see Qantas up and running again, and then he'll move on to something else. But he's talking about people who've devoted their whole life to this airline.
Yeah.
And when you do these things to an organisation with 30,000 staff, now 22,000, most of the people in Qantas who've had the vaccination without wanting to have told me they've lost their spirit. Going to work is a drudgery now. They just don't feel like they're part of anything anymore.
And how's that going to work out when a number of pilots who decide they don't want the jab and will take, whatever package it is to walk out the door and take their chances?
Oh, there won't be a package.
I imagine there might be an unlawful as opposed to an unfair dismissal case going forward.
Who knows?
Then.
who knows? I mean, that's running way too far ahead at the moment. But at the end of the day, the spirit of Australia is badly
what about the ones that
damaged.
are just getting sick? I don't know about Qantas, but we had 4 BA pilots, I think, die earlier in the year after their first shots, and I don't know if there was more after that.
Carl, I've had so many messages as a result of my video from pilots serving around the world who are in wheelchairs, who are sick,
wow,
who have had major issues, and they all relate it to the jab because they were perfectly fine before that.
Yeah, wow.
So you can't deny when people are telling you their story. I meant if the mainstream media had their way, I would be looking at those things as fake. That's just activists, extremists trying to stir up the pot.
Yeah,
they're mums and dads, Carl. They're real living people. Now, when I went to Qantas to fly for Qantas, I gave them my pilot's license, which I worked with my dreams from the age of 5. I have wanted to do this all of my life. And I struggled through a dysfunctional family upbringing. I had no education, but the dream of flying was what got me going. So when I went to an employer like Qantas, I gave them a license that belonged to me. That's my license. That's my career. And I said to a chief pilot in Qantas once who was playing around with some policies that I didn't agree with, you see yourself at the top of the pyramid, don't you? And he said, yeah. And I said, I don't. I see you at the pointy end of the pyramid, and the pyramid's upside down. So you're at the bottom, and all the weight of the expectations of every little boy and girl who dreamed they would one day fly is on your shoulders. Don't mess with it. You're messing with it like you're playing with someone's virginity almost. It's like don't mess with this.
Yeah.
This is too special.
Yeah.
So what I'm giving you is something that I have dreamt and worked my whole life to give you. And you don't own it. That belongs to me. And my spirit belongs to me. And you don't own that.
Absolutely.
And so when I've got a son-in-law who's working for BHP up in the Pilbara, they've been given a mandate to get vaccinated. He's a really good miner. He's been a miner for many years. He's a great miner. And all his mates up there. You know, we tend to junk fly-in, fly-outers, and we tend to junk, truckies, and we tend to junk construction workers or anything. But these people are the lifeblood of our country. This country is only surviving because of the stuff we dig out of the ground and give to the Chinese.
Yep.
And say, all right, you take their spirit. These guys are proud to push the iron ore through. You take their spirit and see how long they hang around. Yeah, and why does a miner need to be vaccinated?
Yeah.
Why does someone driving a truck need to be vaccinated? This country is destroying the spirit of its people. This country is just, these companies are destroying the spirit of their staff. And I'm on a roll, Carl, please let me go.
You keep going.
This nation, if we don't stand for this now, forget vaccines. If we don't stand for protecting our rights as Australian citizens to travel in our country without fear or favour, then don't you dare go to an Anzac Day commemoration, because you defile the memory of those who died to save and give you the freedoms that you've just thrown away. Don't you dare.
Here.
Don't you dare. So for me, that's what it's all about. The big picture is, you can say everything you like about conspiracies and everything. There is one. It's called the battle between good and evil.
Yeah.
And we have to choose this day who we will serve. And I want to stand in good. And for me, the architect of good in the battle of good and evil is Jesus Christ. And I make no mistakes about it. I'm in his court.
Yep.
And it's unfashionable to be in that court in this country. Religious liberties are being shot to pieces once again by the evil side of the equation. So if you don't back what is good, and you think that putting, let's say 20% of Australians are not vaccinated, or 10%, you were talking about building a leper colony, metaphorically, or maybe even physically, to put between 2.5 million and 5.5 million Australians in isolation. Now, Mr. Morrison, what are you going to do with those people? Are they going to be locked in isolation forever? Are they going to be re-educated? Are they going to be put into camps? What are you going to do? Are you going to starve them into submission? Is that what your plan is for this democratic nation? I want you to answer that question, because I don't think you've thought past the next election, which you're going to lose.
Absolutely.
He will lose it. And he will lose it the minority parties will get control, and that's because the people are saying enough's enough. So
Well,
we have to consider this. And if you are an Australian who thinks it's all right for me to not be able to go into a shop or not to be able to have a visitor in New South Wales, as of mid-October, I will not be able to have a visitor to my home. Not one.
wow.
If I've got to go to Canberra to do something, and I'm planning to, I will have to take jerry cans in my car to get me there and back. I won't be able to fly, and I won't be able to go to a service station to get fuel.
Wow.
If any Australian thinks that that's right, don't say that you got the jab for the country or for democracy.
Yeah.
Don't say in one breath that I did it for the community when you're telling people like me I should rot in home isolation. You don't care about the community. You just care about yourself. Let's get it real.
What they care about is fitting in. And I think I say the same thing. If you stood up and went to a Black Lives Matter movement, or you've posted about Black Lives Matter, or you've posted on the Me Too movement, or any of these other movements that have come and gone, it doesn't matter what it is. And yet you think it's okay to segregate a group of people, your neighbours, for no reason other than they might have a different opinion to you, then what exactly are you saying is okay? To me, it just the speed with which this has come is astonishing. And
you're saying everything's okay.
Yeah, that's right. And you are. That's exactly right. Because I was actually told they were debating fourth trimester terminations in Parliament. That is being discussed in Parliament. Now, when I heard that, I thought, I said, no, don't you mean third? No, we mean fourth.
Wow.
Since when does Parliament even get to debate this stuff? That sort of stuff should be surely doctors discussing with patients for individual, how many of those situations are happening that they need to be debated. And where do these politicians, who are supposed to be no more than spokespeople for the people, get off saying that a certain group of people who pay their taxes, who have potentially, my grandfather and my uncle both fought for the country. Where are the soldiers? Where are the vets? Where are the vets? Where were they in Australia? In Victoria, we didn't even get to march for Anzac Day.
Yeah.
That was no outcry from them, but was there? Maybe that was censored as well.
Yeah.
You know, when are people going to step up?
And that's the thing. Let's get people to step up. Guys, I'm going to let you go. This has gone a bit longer than I'd thought initially, but it's been such interesting subject matter. Graham, can I wish you all the best? And I'd love to keep in touch with you as we go forward. If you've ever got a message you'd like to impart, then by all means, happy to help in any way, shape or form. Sally, you and I are going to continue on. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, but a takeaway from this for people is you do have rights under the Privacy Act. It's essentially illegal for people to ask you your vaccine status. You don't have to share it. And there are punishments involved for people who would try and force it from you, which leads us down the track of the World Court and ways and means of maybe approaching that. That's a whole other story. So too is the abortion debate. There are ways, and the question I think surrounding fourth-term abortion should be, and you asked it, why are we having this conversation? Okay, that's the question people need to really ask and go and look for an answer for, not wait to be told an answer by the media or the politicians. Go and look for an answer. It's a very unpleasant one. Go and have a look. It is there. So Martin, thank you for your participation. I love your sign and look forward to having you involved further up the track. I know, didn't get a word.
The one question you asked him, he didn't get a chance to answer.
I don't. Sally has an answer, and she's very well researched.
Wonderful.
That'll be another topic another day, I'm sure.
So people in the health industry, people in the airline industry, people in any industry, you have rights. They're all your basic rights. Know them. Know the Australian Privacy Act, or at least know the portion of it that spells out your right not to have to divulge sensitive personal information. I think that's the biggest thing. And don't volunteer your status to anybody. Keep it quiet.
All of it.
Don't volunteer that status. Graham, thank you again very much for everything you've done here today and your initial recording. And good luck going forward, Sally. I can't wait to talk to you next time.
Carl. Look forward
Thanks,
to it.
Carl.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you,
Thanks for
Sal.
having me.
Love you, Martin.
Thank you. Love you too.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Guys.